Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is the Institute Saga 3 in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Chapter 6, Awakenings. Pietro. Magneto said almost absently as he concentrated on dabbing some paint on the canvas. Pietro waited for his father to remove the brush before speaking. Dad, Techmage says it's time. You want me to tell Doom? That's Von Doom or Dr. Doom. Magneto corrected as he put the lid back on the paints before swishing the brush in a beaker of water set on the table for just that purpose. Yes, please give him my respects and tell him that his heir is about to be born. Gotcha. Quicksilver replied before vanishing in a blur of speed. Magneto sighed and shed the artist's smock he was wearing before using his powers to dress himself in his normal outfit. The metal fabrics split and reformed around him before he turned and strode out of the door, his cloak flaring dramatically. Eric. Magneto nodded to the armored figure entering the main hall. Lord Doom. You got here faster than I expected. I recently acquired the designs for a Kryptonian anti-gravity generator. Doom said in explanation. By integrating it into my armor and tuning the output, I can now fly at speeds in excess of Mach 3. However, the energy cost is limiting. All technology involves trade-offs. Magneto agreed. Materials, cost, time, power. And what do you intend to do with yours? Doom asked curiously. I hope that you do not intend to move against me. Perish the thought. Magneto chuckled. If all countries were like yours, my cause would not be needed. Others may claim that Latveria is a tyrannical state, but you have the closest I have ever seen to a pure meritocracy. Doom nodded. I have worked hard to encourage my people to think about what they can do for the country. And it shows. Magneto noted as they entered the warehouse-sized room filled with various constructions of technology. In the center of the room, 3 3-meter-tall cylinders were arranged, each glowing slightly and with an indistinct figure floating inside while support equipment wrapped around the top and base. 2 of the cylinders were marked at the base with the green and black insignia of the Von Doom family, whilst the third one, which was set to one side, had the stylized scarlet helmet in a blue circle that marked Magneto's organization. Walking over to the first 2 cylinders, Doom activated the status screens and scrutinized the data before nodding approvingly. My children are ready. Soon, Connor will rule with me as father and son, while Cynthia will be my emissary to the world and my weapon. And what of your creation, Magneto? What will you name her? I was thinking. Galatea. Magneto mused and Doom nodded slowly. An excellent name, Eric. You truly are an educated man. Do you wish to decant them now, or do you wish my aid in moving them to your castle? As if in answer to Magneto's question, the doors opened and half a dozen men walked in, all wearing black bodysuits with metal chest plates, boots, greaves, and pauldrons. My men will handle it. Doom said as one of the newcomers touched the 2 cylinders and frowned in concentration. Magneto raised an eyebrow as 2 more men moved to each cylinder and lifted them as if it was weightless. You are not the only one who utilizes the powers of mutants. Doom noted before he turned to stride after the moving cylinders. As he reached the doors, he paused. Eric, I must know, was it your people who stole the statue of Azeroth from the Chicago Museum last week? I do not believe so. Magneto said after a moment's thought. Why? There are certain legends about it being a key for a being of enormous power. Doom said. I have already ordered my people to look into it. I will do the same. Magneto promised. Doom nodded and strode out of the door. The statue of Azeroth. Magneto mused. Interesting. I'm sure I've heard about it before. Awaken, my son. The voice said. Connor, it is time to awake. Connor slowly opened his eyes and looked round. His memories seemed somewhat disorganized and fragmented, but he knew the important things. His name was Connor, he was male, he was in a hospital. And the armored figure by his bed was his father, Victor Von Doom. Good morning, my son. Doom said as Connor looked round, then he helped the teen to sit. How do you feel? All right, I think. Connor said, lifting up his hand and staring at it. Flexing his fingers, he slowly made a fist, then opened his hand again. Excellent. Doom said approvingly. You should be able to move by yourself, so there is a shower through there. Once you are done, meet me in the Great Hall. One of my people will show you the way. Connor nodded, still staring at his hand. The young woman slowly opened her eyes and looked round. Her mind seemed to whirl and spin dizzyingly, but she knew the important things. Her name was Galatea, she was female, she was in a hospital room. Good morning, Galatea. A silver-haired man smiled at her. We have been waiting for you to wake up. Galatea blinked several times and slowly sat up. You're Magneto, how do I know that? That does not matter at this time. Magneto said calmly, although Galatea could hear his heartbeat increasing briefly. For now, welcome to the ranks of my acolytes. With your powers, we shall create a brighter future. Awaken, my daughter. The voice said. Cynthia, it is time to awake. Cynthia slowly opened her eyes and glanced round. Her memories seemed somewhat disorganized and fragmented, but she knew the important things. Her name was Cynthia, she was female, she was in a hospital. And the armored figure by her bed was her father, Victor von Doom. What, my mind? She muttered and Doom reached out, briefly placing his gauntleted hand on her forehead. You are still assimilating your memories, my daughter. You will be at full health soon. In the meantime, you will need to wash and dress. There is a shower through that door and a uniform is on the stool there. Once you are done, meet me in the Great Hall. One of my people will show you the way. Yes, father. Cynthia whispered. All available X-Men, deploy to the Blackbird immediately. Police are reporting a spider larger than an elephant at Pelham Bay and I am detecting a mutant fighting it, Scott and Alex both leapt up from their seats, knocking over the chess set, then they paused and glanced at May Parker, who was putting down her book. I heard him. Go, I'll tidy up. Thanks, Ms. Parker. Alex half shouted as he scrambled for the doorway, his brother hot on his heels. Sprinting to the grav shaft which had replaced the old lift, they both dived into it, letting the energy field carry them down to the fortress levels, then they scrambled into the male changing room where Logan threw their uniforms at them. I sometimes think that these things have nanotech to help us don them. Scott joked as he shucked his normal clothes and stepped into the bodysuit before grabbing his visor. Donning it, he tapped his watch and nodded. Powered up, let's move. You love that watch, don't ya? Alex asked as they sprinted down the corridor and into the launch bay where Frank McCoy waved at them from the hatchway of the Blackbird. As they ran up the ramp, Hank hit the controls to retract it. All aboard! He shouted. Sit down and step in. Logan replied from the cockpit. Scott hurled himself into a vacant seat, then glanced at the blue-furred mutant. Hank? I didn't think that you were an X-Man. If I am to aid my fellow mutants, then I need some field experience. Hank said as the acceleration pushed them into their seats. Besides, there are 3 whom I have been asked to lead. Yeah, got thought right. Rogue called and Scott turned in his seat to see her, Laura and Chris near the back of the compartment. This is going to be cool. Chris grinned and Laura rolled her eyes at him. Oh, come on. Giant spider? How cool is that? Where's Clark? Alex asked. Stadium collapsed in China due to shoddy construction, several hundred trapped. Logan supplied. Clark, Lara, and Karsta headed straight there to provide help. Ouch. Alex winced. Sounds like they're going to have another corruption hunt over there. Chuck, take over. Logan said, unstrapping himself, and Scott's eyes widened behind his visor as he realized who the co-pilot was. Havoc, deploy now. Alex nodded as he pulled himself out of the seat and pressed a recessed button that opened a hatch in the central walkway. Lying down, the platform descended as the hatch closed over him. Launching. Charles announced as a small vibration shook the Blackbird, then the plane dived and Scott briefly spotted his brother racing away, the thrusters in his boots leaving glowing contrails. I gotta get me boots like those. He mused as he was pushed into his seat again, then Logan hit the control to open the ramp. Let's move. The spider reared upwards, screeching as another small explosion hit it, then a metal fist pounded against one of its legs. Colossus! Scott called in surprise. What are you doing here? Buying new coat for Ilyana. The tall Russian replied. Spider went on rampage, helping to stop it. This Gambit, know him from Acolyte days. And I have no idea why I am here. The newly identified mutant shouted as he poured energy into a card before throwing it at the spider. I be minding own business in Latveria, then I be here and giant spider being attacking me. Scott fired a beam at the spider, forcing it backwards while Laura retreated, whispering to Chris as she did so. What the hell is that thing? My beam isn't hurting it. A war cry sounded overhead and Laura dropped onto the spider's back, her claws flashing as she stabbed it. Logan blinked, then looked at the person who had launched her. Piotr. Rogue shouted and Colossus offered his hand to her. One hand slap later, Rogue's skin turned into metal and the two living statues punched the nearest leg in unison, shattering it. Ola. Gambit whistled. I think I'm in Louvre. Less talking, more fighting. Logan roared as Chris hurled him into the air to land beside his daughter. Gambit stared at the youngest member of the team in surprised respect. Il est fort. C'est un Kryptonian. Hank noted as he picked up a chunk of debris and threw it. Gambit nodded, then leapt back as the spider collapsed. Laura somersaulted down and accepted a cloth from Chris, using it to clean her claws before retracting them. Quite a fight. Logan growled as he accepted the cloth in turn and began cleaning his blades. Gonna have to program that one into the danger room. Giant spiders. What you doing here? Piotr rumbled and Gambit started to shrug, then paused as a buzz sounded. Motioning them to remain silent, he pulled a small phone out of his pouch and pressed a button on it. Gambit here. Monsieur. Non, I don't. Pardon? Jene pas. Merde. Closing the phone, Gambit glared at it before pumping some energy into it and throwing it at the spider's corpse. The phone exploded and Gambit sighed. Mon ami, perhaps you have. How you say, spare room. Magneto declared you traitor. Oui. Gambit sighed. Jene pas comprendre, ah well. At least company will be good. Bonjour, mon petit Jouffleur, je m'appelle Remy Lebeau. Rogue gave him a semi-freaked look then stepped back as Scott glanced at her. Rogue, why didn't you use your glove? Faster this way and it gives me slightly more power. Rogue replied, not taking her gaze off Gambit. Also, the memory trickle let me know where Colossus was planning to punch next. Ah. Scott nodded in understanding as Rogue reverted to her human self. The cloaked figure looked down from the rooftop at the deceased giant spider, a small, triumphant smile tugging at his lips. The light briefly illuminated the tattoos on his skin as he pulled out a small phone. Sinister, Mesmero. It is done, the Guardian is no more. You may open the second gate whenever you wish. Placing the phone back in its pocket, Mesmero turned and walked away. And finally, I would like to introduce our newest resident, Remy Lebeau, who prefers to be known as Gambit. Xavier said, pausing as a round of laughing applause greeted Gambit's overly theatrical bow, one only slightly hampered by Ilyana Rasputin hugging him. Gambit has agreed to be our new French teacher as he is fluent in it. In addition, he is an adept in staff fighting and will be running evening classes. Boom boom, Gambit will also help you with your powers if you wish as he can generate explosions as well. Cool. Tabitha half squealed. I believe that everything has been said, so dig in. Ilyana pouted as Remy placed her back in her seat, then he turned to Piotr. Superman, he is the one who cured Mon Petit Angel. He did. Piotr rumbled as he added some vegetables to Ilyana's plate, earning another pout. I owe him for sister's life and sister likes it here. Many friends and now she has her uncle Remy back. She miss you. Gambit looked round and grinned. I think I will like it here, mon ami. Je pense que je vais l'aime beaucoup. Hope so. Piotr replied as he ladled more vegetables onto his sister's plate, ignoring her pout. I do. Chapter 7, Revelations. Clark stared at Gambit in horror. What? You have been cloned. Gambit repeated, then glanced at Kara. Tu l'as vu? Doom as Le fills Et La Fille, Magneto as Unkryptonian Femme. 3 new Kryptonians. Clark half-whispered. And we cannot revive any more of ours yet. This isn't good. Kara agreed. The amount of damage that they could do, we may need to authorize the distribution of kryptonite weaponry. At Gambit's curious look, Clark decided to explain. When we took down Asteroid M, there were several tons of kryptonite which is lethal to us Kryptonians. S.H.I.E.L.D. collected all that they could find with my blessing. Knowing that they have it means that they now know I won't be tempted to do something stupid like world domination. Tony offered to destroy the kryptonite for us, but I told him that it wasn't a good idea. Kara chimed in. Looks like I was more right than I knew. This is worrying and unexpected. Xavier mused, steepling his fingers. Eric believes in mutant superiority above all else, willingly creating and using a Kryptonian clone. I knew that he was many things, but I never took him to be a hypocrite. I'll spread the word to the other teams. Clark sighed. And I'll have to pay a visit to someone, let her know that we may need her to look for other ways to help. Oh. Mystique looked around in curiosity as they stepped through the stone portal into a large, domed chamber. On a stepped podium in the center, a dark-skinned man in golden armor nodded to them. Superman. Mystique. Amazing. Mystique breathed as she looked round, her eyes wide. Heimdall. Clark replied with a nod of respect. We have come to meet with Lady EIR, if she can spare the time. I believe that she was about to seek you out. Heimdall replied with a slight smile. You know where her chambers are. I shall pass the word to her. Thank you. Clark said as he scooped Mystique up, carrying her bridal style. Hey, I can walk. She protested and Clark smiled as he lifted himself off the ground. It's too far for that. He said as they flew out of the chamber and Mystique saw the long, glowing bridge stretching across the raised ocean towards the distant city. I guess that walking all the way along that would take quite some time. She admitted as she wriggled a bit so that she could rest her head against Clark's shoulder. Quite a view, though. A whining noise caught her attention and she craned her neck. Clark. She said after a moment. There's a boat approaching us through the air with 4 people on it. Clark glanced round. Ah, Sif and the Warriors 3. I don't think you've met them before. The boat is flying. Mystique pointed out and Clark gave a gentle shrug as the craft drew up beside them. And your point is? The boat. Eyes. Flying. Mystique repeated as Clark touched down lightly on its deck. Boats don't fly. I didn't know that. Sif said as she used the rudder control to alter course slightly. Well, you learn something new every day. Welcome to Asgard, Lady Kent of the noble house of El. Mystique froze for a moment, then let Clark lower her so that she was standing on the deck. Lady Kent of the noble house of El. She mused. You know, I like that. Mystique, be known to Lady Sif, elite warrior of Asgard and the younger sister of Heimdall. Clark said formally, and may I also introduce the valiant fighters known as the Warriors 3, Fundrel the Dashing. Mystique found her hand being captured and kissed by the sharpest dressed of the trio. Hagun the Grim. Honored. Nodded the dour-faced one. And Volstagg the Valiant. Also known as the Volstagg the Enormous and the Lion of Asgard. Laughed the largest, and oldest, of the trio. I hear that you two are planning on getting married. Once you have kids, bring them over. My kids would love to have some more friends. Volstagg has over 15 children, the majority being orphans who he adopted. Clark whispered into Mystique's ear. His heart is bigger than his waistline. And my waistline is pretty darned big. Volstagg laughed, patting his expansive stomach. Heimdall said that you wanted to see Lady EIR. Sif noted. Since we need to replenish our own healing supplies, we thought we would give you a lift and some company. Thank you. Clark said as the towers of Asgard started to pass on either side of them. So, what happened to you? Ah, we went on a series of quests for Lady EIR, seeking out new ingredients and potions for her. Volstagg rumbled. Truly, it was a marvelous journey. He adopted 2 more children on our second quest. Hagun grunted. and one filled with wonderful battles. He got drunk, squared off to a mirror and knocked himself out. Volstagg glared at the doer warrior. Do you mind? No. Mystique couldn't help but burst out laughing. Sif halted in the doorway and only Clark's reflexes stopped him from colliding with her. Looking over her shoulder, his eyebrows rose as he saw what had startled her. My lord. Sif said with a bow and Odin nodded at her. You may as well enter. All of you. Sif moved to one side, allowing the group ingress, and Clark bowed. Your Highness. Lord El. Odin said in return. My agents have told me that 3 more of your kind now walk Midgard, but on paths that may yet be opposed to yours. It is then perhaps fortunate that Lady Eir has just this day finished remaking the potions needed to awaken your kin. Only 4 of them. Eir said with an apologetic shrug. The 2 who are most harmed will need to remain in their timeless sleep until I can get more ingredients. However, I have also heard that you have been sending your kinfolk to aid others, other groups that you respect and trust to aid all around them. Odin growled as he stalked forwards. And so I ask, where is our Kryptonian? Clark blinked a few times as he tried to comprehend the question. It is quite simple. Odin continued. Kryptonians are stronger than all but the truly elite Asgardian warriors. With the power granted by the Yellow Sun, they can fly and have abilities far beyond that of ours, even lifespans beyond ours. I would appreciate having one in my court. If one of them volunteers, I will be happy to introduce him or her to you. Clark managed and Odin gave a sharp nod. Excellent. I will look forwards to it. Eir sighed as Odin strode regally out of the room. I'm sorry. Thor was talking about his sparring with you and how you are more than worthy of being an Asgardian. Odin would have offered citizenship if it was not for your guardianship of Midgard. Mystique chuckled. That's my man, too darned good to even be a god. Mystique. Eir smiled at the witticism even as she opened a wall cabinet to reveal a quartet of bottles filled with a faintly glowing blue liquid. Are those? Clark asked with quiet reverence and Eir nodded. They are. This is the medicine that will aid in combating the effect of kryptonite, although it would be most efficacious if that young girl lent her abilities once more. Kitty. Clark nodded as Mystique gave him a questioning look. I'm sure that she'll be happy to help. Mayhap we can arrange it that she need not run through the window. Eir said and Clark grinned while Mystique looked at them in confusion. I will be ready to depart for Xavier's mansion at the turn of the noon hour, but if thou doth require more time to summon those you wish to aid, I will understand. I'd better get moving then. Clark said, then paused as Sif tapped him on the shoulder. You fly faster unencumbered. I shall bring Healer Eir and Lady Kent when it is time. Mystique nodded in agreement and Clark gave her a kiss, then blurred out of the door. A second later, a boom echoed. He flies faster than sound. Fondrel marveled. Brethren, I vote that if one of Clark's people chooses to come to Asgard, the Warriors 3 should become the Warriors 4. Seconded. Hagun muttered. Unanimous. Volstagg agreed, then he frowned. Although, how should we integrate him? I know. Let us discuss this over a filling repast. Mystique shook her head as the trio vanished down the long hallway. Are they always like that? They don't change. Sif laughed. They've been like that for centuries and will stay that way for centuries more. Mystique nodded in agreement, then she paused. So, Sif said with a smile. May I offer you a tour of Asgard? Wait. Mystique said slowly. Centuries? Odin said something about lifespans. Scott stepped into the danger room and ducked as a red-clad boy somersaulted over his head, pursued by a trio of drones. A moment later, a dark-haired teenager wearing the House of El crest on his black t-shirt punched through one of the drones while a red and yellow blur knocked a second out of the air. The third fell victim to a very familiar set of claws, then a voice shouted. Pause simulation. Scott glanced round, spotting the speaker. Superboy. Yes, yeah. Chris and the t-shirt wearing teen glanced at each other as the red-clad boy laughed. What's going on? Scott asked curiously. The professor didn't mention any new recruits. We're young Justice, from Cal's dimension. a dark-skinned teenager said as he approached. "We've been briefed on all of you X-Men, Cyclops. My name's Aqualad. These are Robin, Martian Girl, Superboy, Kid Flash and Artemis." Each named person nodded or waved as they were being introduced. "We were curious about the people that Superman had met, so we applied for permission to pay a visit." Aqualad continued. "Generation X accepted our offer of a team spar and showed us this training Sol. We don't have anything like it back in our reality. Solid holograms, wow. We just have hologram-cloaked drones." "Yeah, but I can't download the plans." Robin sulked. "The AI here keeps blocking me. We're inviting the Teen Titans next week." Ray added with a wide grin. "Their leader, Static, has some major electrical powers." Scott nodded, then turned to the older of the two Superboys. "Are you a Kryptonian like Chris is?" Superboy shook his head. "Half Kryptonian. I was created to be a weapon by Cadmus but was freed by my teammates a few weeks ago." Scott raised his eyebrows. "Do you have the full set of powers? Boosted strength, invulnerability, and enhanced senses?" Aqualad provided as Superboy glowered. "His human DNA suppresses some of his powers. Superman is working on a way around it. Better package than I have," Scott said in an attempt to raise the teenager's spirits. "All I have is optic blasts and for years, I couldn't turn the damned things off." Several of Young Justice winced. "So," Scott asked, "who was winning?" "We were." Sunspot grinned. "Yeah, but there's more of you." Kid Flash protested. Scott sighed. "Is this sort of thing going to happen often?" "Well, we have an invitation to visit the Watchtower next month." Ray shrugged. "And Robin said something about a mountain hideout. Why you here?" Laura asked curiously and Scott turned to face one of the Generation X members who had been keeping silent. "Clark is going to try and revive 4 of the remaining 6 and he wants your help, Kitty." The Young Justice group looked at each other in confusion as everyone else's eyes widened. "Lady EIR?" Charles Xavier said with a slight bow. "You honor us with your presence." "I am honored to be here once again," EIR said with a slight smile as she looked round. Behind her, Mystique and Sif emerged from the portal, followed by a floating pallet stacked with equipment. "I assume that we will be using the same theater as before." "That is the plan." Xavier agreed, then he frowned slightly. "If you will pardon me, Lady EIR." EIR nodded and Xavier floated round to drop into position beside Mystique. Sif gave him a measuring look, then nodded before increasing her pace to catch up to EIR. "Mystique," he said gently, "I cannot read your thoughts, but I can sense your emotions. Something happened which has upset you." Mystique nodded slowly. "I found out." "Charles, did you know that as a shapeshifter, I can expect to live several centuries, perhaps even a half-millennium?" "I was unaware of that," Charles admitted. "I will outlive my children," Mystique whispered. "Kurt, Rogue. Their lifespans aren't extended like mine. I will outlive them, their children and their children, but Clark will outlive me." Xavier looked at her and she met his gaze. "Lady EIR has researched Kryptonians, Charles," she said quietly. "As long as they are empowered by a yellow sun, they will be able to live almost forever. Their aging will slow as they reach their prime and effectively halt before age can slow them down. Even with my increased lifespan, it'll be less than a tithe of his. As I'll lose my children, he'll lose me. But what matters is the time we have together." A new voice said and Mystique found herself swept up in Clark's arms. "Never doubt my love for you, beloved." Charles smiled and backed away, leaving the pair standing together in the corridor. Chapter 8, Dispersal. The 4 Kryptonians looked up as the door opened and a bald man came in on a hover chair. "Good morning. My name is Professor Charles Xavier. How many others survived?" "Aside from you 4, there are only 6 other Kryptonians, 10 if you count clones." "Clones?" the short-haired woman asked curiously. 4 of them, as far as we know," Charles said with a slight shrug. 3 of them are in Latveria, a small country ruled by Victor von Doom, while the 4th is in stasis because of his violent disposition. U4, Kall, Karazorel, Konel, Karstawarel and the two still in stasis are all that remains of Krypton. The quartet sighed. I had hoped that these files were a lie. One of the men sighed, waving at the holographic screens. So, what now? Charles gave them a gentle smile. Have you reviewed the data files on the teams? Yes, why? It has become something of a tradition that when a Kryptonian is revived, he or she joins a team. The team provides support in adjusting to the new world, new friends, even romantic interests in a couple of cases. In exchange, the Kryptonian acts as the heavy hitter on the team, their big guns, you might say. Kara is apparently working with a group called the Avengers. The second woman noted. Do they have another opening? It could be problematic. Kryptonians, once fully energized by our sun, are the strongest, most powerful beings on Earth. Charles said slowly. Having several of them on the same team could make non-allied nations nervous enough to launch a preemptive strike. I see. So, when do you need our decisions? Not for several weeks. Xavier said as the door behind him opened to reveal three more people familiar to the seated quartet. I'll give you privacy to discuss things. As the door closed behind Xavier, one of the seated girls rose and embraced Kara. Kara. I'm so glad you survived as well. I'm happy to see you finally awake, Thura. Kara replied with a smile, then she looked round. Cirl, Monel, Lorzad, welcome to Earth. I'm sure you remember Connell, now called Chris Kent, and Karstawarel. Chris grinned. Hi. Good to see you again, little cousin. Cirl grinned as she pulled him into a hug. Hey, brother, you going to say hello as well? Con. Monel nodded. Looking healthy. Found a girl yet? Ow. Cirl shook her head. Stop teasing him, or I'll hit you again. I have. Chris said quietly. Both siblings stared at him in shock. What? Her name's Laura, she has enhanced healing and retractable blades in her hands and feet. Karsta provided, smirking as she did so. Kara's hooked up with an old man called Steve. He was frozen for most of those years. Kara huffed. He's not old. And I haven't found anyone special yet, but I've made lots of friends. Karsta finished. Xavier mentioned Kall. Lorzad noted, glancing around. Our youngest cousin. Cirl asked. I wonder if he's grown at all since I last changed his nappies. I have. A new voice said and Cirl's eyes widened. Whoa. Kal? What happened? You're as big as I am. Monel marveled. It's a long story. Clark said as he stepped into the room, then he smiled. And we really need to get you sorted so that you can attend my wedding this weekend. My baby cousin's getting married. Cirl asked in near shock. Clark nodded, then paused. Drat, something's come up. Kara, you're in charge. So. Cirl said as she stepped out and posed with a grin. How do I look? Nice. Kara said, looking as Cirl's skin-tight, short-sleeved black bodysuit, black elbow-length gloves and blue knee-length cape. I must ask, what's with the icon? Cirl looked down at the red, unbounded S on her chest. It's a variation of the House of L symbol used by the heiress of the cadet branch on formal occasions. I thought it was appropriate. Not bad. Monel said as he stepped out of his changing room, adjusting the fit of his red tunic to which his ankle-length blue cape was fixed by a pair of large golden circular clasps. Catching the curious look, he grinned. Traditional outfit of the honor guard of the head of a house. He explained, motioning to his own outfit. Since we owe Kal our lives, it seemed appropriate. I went for a more utilitarian look. Lorzad said as he emerged in his blue bodysuit, the cape notable by its absence. Kara blinked. That isn't the icon of the House of Zed. She pointed out and Lorzad sighed. After my uncle was convicted of treason and sentenced to somatic reconditioning, my mother decided that I should use the icon of her house, the winged dragon snake. Dad always said that there was something fishy about my uncle's conviction, though. I heard. Thera said as she emerged to join the others, the symbol on her chest the same as on Lorzid's. Seeing Kara's quizzical expression, she laughed. What, you didn't realize that he's my cousin? No. Kara admitted with a wry smile. Explains quite a bit, though. We made our decisions while we were designing our outfits. CIRL said. As I was training in law enforcement before the incident, I believe that I shall take up the slot offered by S.H.I.E.L.D. Japan for me? Thera grinned. I'll fit right in. None of them have capes either. The group Excalibur sounds interesting. Mon-El said with a slight shrug. I hear that I can get a good fight in Asgard. Lorzid grinned. I'm in master level in Horokonu and rated low expert in no Kokonu, staff fighting. Hopefully I'll find a decent sparring partner or two. And with the doors, it's not like we'll be any real distance away. CIRL added with a smile. Kara opened her mouth, then paused, one hand cupped over her ear. What is it? The door to the bank burst open as the quartet of masked men piled through. All right. One of them shouted. Let's get out of here before the cops show up. I don't think we need worry about that. The one in the lead managed as he came to a halt. The others looked round him and two of them swore as a very familiar caped figure turned to face them. Ah shit. Supergirl. Kara tilted her head slightly. You look familiar. Who are they? No. The lead burglar half shouted as he watched the quartet descend into flanking positions. No. This isn't right. Why does the universe keep doing this to us? Are you, all? One of the other burglars managed, trying to ignore the breakdown the lead burglar was undergoing. Kryptonians. CIRL nodded. We are. There's more of them. The trailing robber stated in a disbelieving tone of voice. Wait, I remember now. Kara realized. I helped to catch you before. Why did you try again? Because we saw that Superman was helping out in Italy. The lead burglar said in a defeated voice, placing his gun on the ground. We thought you'd be doing Avengers stuff, so, damn. For more. A siren rose as a police car screeched to a halt beside Kara and the doors opened to disgorge a pair of grinning cops. We have a delivery for you. Kara grinned. Damn it. The lead robber swore. We're definitely going to get on TV for this. Shut up. Hey, Kara. Clark said as he landed. What did you again? This just isn't fair. The leader half sobbed. Okay. Clark finally said. Let's get these men to their new accommodations, then we can see about getting you all to where you've decided to go. Lorzid looked around curiously as he and Clark stepped onto the Bifrost Bridge, then he followed Clark into the air and towards the gleaming towers of Asgard. This is amazing. He said. So like Krypton, yet so unlike at the same time. Ahead of them, a boat rose into the air, growing as it came to meet them and Lorzid's eyes widened. Who? Sif and the Warriors 3. Clark said with a smile. I sent word that I was coming, they've obviously decided to come and greet us. She's beautiful. Lorzid whispered and Clark hid a smirk. Be careful, you do anything to hurt her and her big brother Heimdall will be after you in order to make a rug from your freshly peeled skin. And that's not counting on what the Warriors 3 would do to you first. Lorzid winced at the thought. Clark. Volstagg bellowed. Good to see you again, who's your friend? Volstagg, this is Lorzid, a fellow Kryptonian. You any good at fighting? Sif asked as she walked round the portly warrior and Lorzid grinned. Trained for years. Years. Sif scoffed. I've trained for centuries. Care to spar? Lorzid laughed as he pulled out his extendable staff from the holster in the small of his back and hit the trigger to make it lengthen. Sif grinned and pulled a similar staff from her belt. Let's get to the training grounds, then we can dance. What is that? CIRL asked in amazement as she and Lara emerged from the clouds. The S.H.I.E.L.D. helicarrier. Kara replied, adjusting course. This is Supergirl to helicarrier control, requesting permission to come aboard with one guest. CIRL stared at the massive airborne ship with the quartet of Gravetick rotors providing the lift that kept it in the sea of clouds, then Kara tapped her on her shoulder. "We have permission and my boyfriend will meet us." "Your boyfriend?" CIRL repeated teasingly as they angled down towards the deck. As they landed, CIRL stumbled, only to be caught. Looking up, she found herself looking into the kindest blue eyes she had ever seen. "Hi. Steve." Kara half shouted and CIRL stared as Lara caught the man in a hug, giving him a kiss as she spun him round. "Steve, this is CIRL. CIR, meet Captain Steve Rogers of the Avengers and my boyfriend. Honored to meet you." CIRL smiled. "So, you're the one that Director Fury wishes to recruit into SWORD?" Steve said, and Kara tilted her head. "SWORD. Strategic World Observation and Response Division," Steve explained as he led them to one of the hatches. "It's a semi-independent department of S.H.I.E.L.D. that deals primarily with extraterrestrial threats, same as S.H.I.E.L.D. deals with terrestrial problems. They're interlinked organizations with many operatives being transferred between in order to increase their all-round effectiveness. Both SWORD and S.H.I.E.L.D. have domes on the new moon base that Clark set up, although the domes are connected by doors, allowing for almost instant transit. So, I might end up on the moon." CIRL grinned. "Nice. Maybe." Steve shrugged. "I don't really know that much about SWORD myself, the Avengers haven't had to work with them. But I have." A new voice said. "Agent Phil Coulson, honored to meet you, CIRL of Krypton." "Actually, it's CIRL of Argo, but thank you." CIRL replied with a smile. "So, SWORD. Tell me about it, please." Thura looked round at the large hall that they had emerged into. "These doors are really useful," she mused. "We didn't have anything like them on Argos." "Yeah, they're neat," Chris said as he led the way. "Anyway, this is one of the embassy modules that Dad retrieved from Krypton and he—" Chris' explanation was cut off by a massed cry of Kawaii. And Thura blinked as the young Kryptonian was almost buried by over a dozen teenage girls glomping him. From behind her, Thura heard Laura sigh. "Does this happen often?" "Every time." Laura half growled as she strode forwards and began pulling the fangirls off her friend. Thura grinned, then turned as someone approached. "Am I correct in assuming that you are Thura Kavar?" the man asked, and Thura nodded. The armor-clad man bowed deeply. "Welcome to the Dome of Hope. My name is Harada Kanuakayo, although on missions, I am the Silver Samurai. Do you speak the true language?" "I was granted knowledge of the true language and the customs of the people by Miss Marvel of the X-Men." Thura replied flawlessly, returning his bow. "I look forwards to flying into battle by your side." Although Kanuakayo's face remained almost inscrutable, Thura easily caught the microscopic tightening that gave away the smile that he would have been wearing. "Superboy Dono, Konoichi Heim, this one expresses his gratitude for escorting Thura Heim to this place. This one is aware that you have many calls upon your time, so with your permission, this one will provide the tour and introductions to the team." Chris stared at him in confusion even as the last girl was prized off him. "He say thank you, he has from here?" Laura translated and Chris' expression lit up with understanding. Karsta and Mon-El descended through the cloud layer as the lights of London sparkled below them. "Incoming, left low," Mon-El said, then he frowned. "That is not bodysuit design." Karsta followed his gaze and smiled. "That's Captain Britain. He's an energy projector type who can use it to fly." The rising figure soon caught up to them and Karsta nodded. "Brian." "Karsta." Captain Britain nodded. "Fine weather for flying, isn't it?" Karsta started giggling, then managed to pull herself back together. "Must you be so darn stereotypical?" "Why yes, I must." Captain Britain deadpanned back, causing Karsta to start laughing again. "And you must be Mon-El. Welcome to Great Britain. We do things differently than they do across the pond." "Across the pond?" Mon-El repeated in confusion. "He means the Atlantic Ocean." Karsta supplied and Mon-El's eyes widened. "Wait, if they call that a pond?" Xavier looked up as Clark entered the study. "All done." All done and Chris is getting some sleep. Clark confirmed. Laura was grumbling about how Chris attracts too many fangirls. I got quite the glower when I asked if she was feeling jealous since she has less than he does. Charles laughed. Odin sends his regards, by the way. Clark added. And Sif says that if there are any more as good at fighting as Lorzad, she's going to stage a raid. Chapter 9, Wedding Bells. And now, the main story, the long-awaited double wedding of the century. The anchorwoman said with a wide smile. America's greatest superhero, Clark Kent, will be marrying Raven Darkholme while the superhero/scientist Reed Richards will be marrying Susan Storm at the same ceremony, both of them being held today at the Xavier Institute at Bayville. With a weather manipulator as one of Superman's friends, a bright and sunny day will be guaranteed. We now go to Matt Hicksville at the Xavier Institute. Matt. Thank you, Debbie. Matt smiled, his elegantly coiffed hair barely moving in the breeze as he grinned at the camera. As you can see behind me, the guests are already arriving. We have representatives from the Henshin Rangers, the famed X-Men and Generation X, and all of the Avengers are attending. We even have visitors from other worlds with 5 of Asgard's greatest warriors, Sif, and the Warriors 4. Joining me now is the world-famous multi-billionaire, philanthropist, and patron of the arts, Wilson Fisk. Mr. Fisk, thank you for agreeing to be interviewed today, and may I say that you look very snazzy in that suit. Thank you, Matt. Wilson Fisk smiled. I was honored to receive an invitation to celebrate the marriage of the world's greatest hero. I am certain that everyone watching will join with me in wishing Clark Kent and his soon-to-be wife many happy years together. Something about him gives me the shivers. Kitty whispered as she watched Wilson Fisk laugh along with the reporter. Amara nodded. I agree. He's a criminal. Peter Parker said quietly from behind them. Goes by the name Kingpin. I've run up against him a few times, barely escaped with my life. That's pure muscle under that suit. Kitty gaped in shock as she took in Fisk's huge size. But, how? Think sumo wrestler, bodybuilder style. Peter growled. He's damned good, though. The police know that he's the Kingpin, but they haven't been able to prove a single thing, not even a misfiled tax return. Then what's he doing here? Peter sighed. He couldn't not be invited. As I said, there isn't a single shred of proof. If there was, he'd be in jail for the rest of his life. Damn. Amara cursed. Politics. Laura sighed and adjusted the collar of Chris' outfit again. Stop fidgeting. She ordered. But the collar's too tight and it's too high. Chris moaned. Why couldn't I wear my normal outfit? Leather jacket wrong for wedding. Even I know this. Laura said as she tweaked the way his robe hung. Mystique wear actual dress today, not fake clothes. Clark wear special formal robes. You his son, you wear formal robes too. Chris sighed as Laura adjusted his tabard-like overrobe again, then he frowned. Fake clothes. Thought you knew. Laura said in surprise. Mystique clothes not clothes. Mystique not wear clothes. Sure she does. Chris protested. She usually wears a white top and a skirt, doesn't she? Mystique shapeshifter. Laura said as if explaining the obvious. Very good shapeshifter, but not able to change what she wear, so she not wear anything and shift to look like clothes. Chris stared at her in shock, then blushed. You mean, all the times that I hugged her? Just not think about it. Laura advised as she pulled a adamantium comb, courtesy of Tony Stark, out of her purse and began neatening Chris' hair. Easier that way. Chris started to nod, then winced as the comb caught in his hair. Charles Xavier paused and the man he was talking to followed his gaze. Isn't that? It is. Charles said worriedly. If you will excuse me. The new arrivals watched him approach and as he stopped in front of them, the leader spoke. Professor Xavier. It is perhaps ironic that we have not met before today given our positions as men of greatness. Lord Doom. Xavier replied with a slight nod. I was unaware that you had been invited. I managed to procure a trio of invitations. Doom shrugged. Being the ruler of a country does have its perks. Do not worry, I am not here to cause any problems. Although I still truly believe that Reed Richards is unworthy to become Susan's husband, even I have to admit that she could very easily have done far worse. Therefore, I shall concede without a fight, albeit mainly because of the power of her allies, although I do claim one victory on this day. I find it amusing that the dress that Susan is wearing was designed by me, as is the one worn by Mystique. Xavier blinked as the sincerity of Doom's words flowed across and hid a wince at Reed's probable reaction to the last bit of information. Clark would probably find it amusing. In that case, welcome to the Institute. Charles finally managed. May I ask who your companions are? They are my children. Doom replied, causing everyone within earshot to gawk at him. This is my son and heir, Connor Von Doom. The teenaged boy, clad in a black bodysuit and a green tunic, nodded respectfully to Xavier. And this is my daughter and my emissary to the world, Cynthia Von Doom. The blonde girl nodded before taking half a step back, absently smoothing out her black-green belted dress and shifting her green cape slightly. They are both of the Von Doom clan. Doom added. I have great expectations of them. Xavier nodded. Then I bid you both welcome to this peaceful place. Doom chuckled at the slight stress Xavier had applied to a particular word. Do not fear. We are simply here to watch. Nothing more. You have Doom's word of honor. Talon. Goliath. Talon gaped. But, it's daylight. How? This amulet. Goliath said, lightly caressing the golden disc that rested on his chest. Some allies I encountered have allowed me to use it that I need not enter stone sleep this day. Hey, brother. Another voice said and Talon grinned at the dark-haired police officer. Eliza. Still hanging out with this rockhead. Hey, he's only a rockhead during the day. Eliza laughingly protested even as Goliath rolled his eyes. So, how are things going with you? We are well. Talon smiled as he enfolded his sister in a hug. Maggie and I are talking about getting wedded as well. Should I be best woman or maid of honor? Eliza teased and Talon chuckled, then stiffened. Ah. Eliza realized as she glanced over her shoulder. He's changed, you know. I know. Talon half snarled, then he closed his eyes and inhaled deeply. I know, but part of me still hates him for what he had done to me. But would you have met Maggie had he not? Goliath asked quietly and Talon stood silent for a while before sighing. No, I probably wouldn't. And I wouldn't be able to truly fly either. We all make bad decisions and Xanatos affect more because of the power he wields. Goliath stated. However, he has learned from the past and seeks to turn himself into a better man. If only more would do the same. Talon nodded, then grinned. Hey, sis, you've really trained him well. Goliath's offended glare sent Talon into gales of laughter. I think it's going quite well, so far. Martha commented as she placed another plate of snacks on the long buffet table, glancing round to check that the students who had volunteered to help her were not getting things wrong. I agree. May said before taking a sip from her tea. I have never seen this place so active. And so many costumes. Look, there's someone dressed as a bat of all things. He's Batman. Martha giggled. He's one of the top-ranking heroes from that other world, the one that Kal came from. Kal came as well, although I'm not sure where he is. The sound of electrical crackling attracted their attention to where Ray and a black-skinned teenager were taking it in turns to throw lightning at each other. Who's the new boy? His name is Static and he is the leader of the Teen Titans. A familiar voice said. Both women turned to see Kal shamelessly helping himself to several of the pastries which had been topped with the modified Xavier/House of L symbol. These are amazing, Mrs. Kent. If you ever want a job with the Justice League, I'll be happy to sponsor you. Flatterer. Martha laughed. I assume that his powers are purely electrical. May asked and Kal nodded. Yes, although he has received quite a bit of training from Batman and several other members of the League so that he can lead his team. How many teams are there? Martha asked. Well, not all of them are part of the Justice League itself, but there's the Teen Titans, Young Justice, the Sentinels of Magic, although they're more of an allied group than an integral part of the League, the outsiders, even I don't know much about them, they answer to Batman. Then there's other groups like the Green Lantern Corps, they're a kind of police force that operates on an interstellar basis, Storm Watch, the Ultimen, who seem to be linked to Cadmus. Quite a few, then. Martha noted. We all try to build a better world. Kal shrugged. A better world is a good dream to have. May agreed. Mystique. Jean Grey called as she tapped on the door. A moment later, Aurora opened it and Jean's eyes widened. Wow! That is an amazing dress. Thank you. Mystique smiled as she let Aurora finish fastening the laces on the back. It feels weird, though, it's the first item of clothing I have worn in over a decade. Jean froze, completely unable to formulate a response, and Aurora chuckled. I think you broke her. Mystique waved a hand in front of Jean, bringing the younger girl back to reality with a jolt. Who's here? Susan Storm called as she peeped in from the inner room. Jean. Excellent, I could use some help. I can't ask Karsta. As I'm too strong. Karsta grinned as she appeared. I'd probably tighten it too much and Sue would faint due to lack of air. Kryptonian weddings aren't this complicated. Except for those for council members. Kara supplied. Remember Jor-El's? Karsta nodded. Clark looks so much like Jor-El, but he has his mother's eyes. Looking good. Steve Rogers smiled as he adjusted Clark Kent's raised collar slightly and twitched the overrobe so that the red fabric hung straight, the embroidered symbol of the House of L stretching across his chest without a single wrinkle. Still can't believe that you chose him to be your best man. Logan mock grumbled. Logan, Clark said with a wry smile, even you have to admit that you don't do formal very well. Logan glanced down at his somehow rumpled suit that he had donned only an hour previously, then shrugged. Huh, you may have a point, Flyboy. Well, I'm sure that your mom is putting out more food, so I'm getting a snack. You want anything? I don't think I could keep it down. Clark admitted. I've never felt this nervous before. You're one of the 10 strongest people on the planet, Boy Scout. Logan growled. You'll be fine. Trust me. Steve and Clark watched the Canadian stomp out of the room, then Steve laughed. He's right, you know. Physically, you'll be fine. You love her, she loves you. She actually agreed to wear clothes today. Clark interjected and Steve blinked. Wait, what? Doesn't she normally wear that white skirt and top? Clark looked at him and Steve blinked a few times in thought before he inhaled sharply. I see you've just worked it out. Clark smirked as Steve blushed furiously. Before the super soldier could respond, there was a knock on the door and Poitra leaned in. It's time. You come. Be strong. Not faint or we never let you live down. Clark chuckled at the Russian's comment, then he nodded. We're coming. Xavier smiled as, behind him, the crowd started murmuring. Turning his head, he watched as Clark Kent, accompanied by Steve Rogers, and Reed Richards, accompanied by Bruce Banner, walked down the aisle to the altar where the local priest, Father Johann Karl, was waiting with a reassuring smile. Although Reed, Bruce, and Steve were all dressed in formal suits, Clark had chosen to wear formal Kryptonian robes, a decision which he had explained as being his way of acknowledging his biological parents' sacrifice. Behind them, Chris Kent followed as Clark's ring-bearer while Ben Grimm acted for Reed. Xavier's smile widened as he considered the disparity between the Rocky hero and the young boy. While Ben wore a specially adapted formal suit, Chris was wearing robes similar to that worn by his adopted father, although without the traditional pieces of armor that denoted the ability to protect. The group reached the altar and stepped to the sides, then Clark froze, staring up at the sky with an expression of shock, then of resigned irritation. Curious, Xavier craned his neck to see what had caught Clark's attention. The sky was clear, with only a quarter moon rising above the horizon. And a spiky silhouette of a giant starship in front of the moon. Odin Demet. Lorzad swore as he spotted the spacecraft in orbit. Xavier nodded in agreement as the crowd began to realize what was happening. We'll need a space-capable plane. Batman growled, earning a surprised look. What? You do know that I can't breathe in space. Chapter 10, General. General Druzid, the leader of the betrayed and the senior surviving officer of the Krypton Space Force, leaned back in his control chair, one hand idly stroking his goatee. We have made orbit, sir. Taldin reported from the helm. As per your instructions, we are between the target planet and its natural satellite. Sensor scans of target planet are underway. AZ-LAN reported from the jury-rigged tactical station, and a holographic sphere formed in the middle of the bridge, resolving to form an image of the planet below them. We have multiple hypertaps detected, one on the small islands ahead of the largest continent, two on this continent and one on this island here. All of the hypertaps are near centers of population. Update. There's a hypertap on the far side of the natural satellite. The new one and this one here are consistent with those of Class 6 embassies. These two are Class 4 while this one is a Class 3. Interesting. Zed mused. Kall must have visited Krypton at some point before we awoke. It would seem that he didn't detect the depot, although given that all military installations were designed to be as stealthy as possible as a matter of course, that does not surprise me. A new hologram formed and Zed looked at the image of the woman. Yes, Feyre, The golden feather is ready to deploy when needed, General his second-in-command stated. I wonder if the natives have, Zed began, only to be interrupted. New contacts. Holy row, Zed blinked as the main view screen flickered and showed something that he would have deemed impossible even a time part prior. Against the backdrop of the planet that he intended to become the new home of the Kryptonian people, a group of dots were rising towards them. The screen zoomed in and the dots resolved into a small group of spaceplanes, flanked by over half a dozen people who were somehow flying without propulsion, whose only concession to the vacuum of space was a small mask over their lower faces. How is this possible? Zed breathed as he rose from his chair for a better look, then his eyes narrowed as the red cape on one of them became visible for a moment. That was the crest of the House of L. Zoom in on him, The image expanded to almost fill the screen and Zed's eyes widened. Kall, Sir, Zed turned and started to stride from the bridge, barking orders as he went. Start flashing the landing lights around Bay 2. Nam-ek, you're with me, armor up and grab a rotary plasma cannon. I want the bay open, but the atmosphere containment field active. I want the mess hall redecorated for use as a diplomatic area, As he stepped out of the bridge, he paused and glanced back at the figure on the view screen. Have I come all this way only to find myself in a war I cannot win, Zed stood at the back of the hangar bay, watching the approaching figures. As they each flew into the bay, they reoriented themselves and then slowly sank to the deck, landing lightly. Taking a covered deep breath, Zed took one step doorwards to attract their attention. I am General Zed, the senior officer of the survivors of Krypton. I come here in search of another of my kind who was sent here as a child. Zed paused and looked at the leader, noting the emblazoned symbol of L on his red overrobe. Are you Kall, the son of Jor-El and Lara Van L? I am, although I prefer to go by the name which my adoptive parents gave me. Clark, of the family Ken. Zed nodded. I knew your birth father. Jor-El was a friend of mine before, but that is a story for another time. How did you fly through space? It is an ability which was bestowed on me when I was younger. Clark replied and Zed tilted his head. In your alley. Lorzid? Is that really you? The man with the dragon snake icon on his chest nodded with a faint smile. It is, Uncle Zed. Clark rescued us from Argo and revived us. Yes. Zed exulted as his gaze darted between the people before him. Another 9 Kryptonians. Join me. Together, We can build a new Krypton. I have 53 following me. With the technology we retrieved from Krypton and your powers, we can create a new world for us. Hashtag hashtag. Hashtag hashtag create a new world. Hashtag hashtag Clark repeated suspiciously. Hashtag hashtag in which world would you claim? Hashtag hashtag. Zed paused as he took in the suddenly combative stances of the 9 standing before him. Hashtag hashtag you are attached to the world we orbit. Hashtag hashtag he stated. Hashtag hashtag then, which world would you suggest? Hashtag hashtag. How about the next one in? Suggested the man who looked almost exactly like Clark, but who wore a black bodysuit with silver gauntlets, boots, belt, and cape. Clark, have any of the nations of Earth claimed Venus? No, they haven't. Clark mused, then he nodded. Hashtag hashtag we have a possible solution, thanks to KAL hashtag hashtag. Hashtag hashtag wait hashtag hashtag Zed said in shock, turning to the apparent twin. Hashtag hashtag you are KALL? I thought he was, hashtag hashtag. Hashtag hashtag I'm a different KALL hashtag hashtag the visored man explained with a slight shrug. Hashtag hashtag we'll explain later hashtag hashtag. Zed frowned. Hashtag hashtag perhaps we should take this to the meeting hall hashtag hashtag. Hashtag hashtag wait hashtag hashtag Lorzad said. Hashtag hashtag uncle, tell us about Brainiac, hashtag hashtag. Hashtag hashtag that traitorous piece of defective programming, hashtag hashtag Zed ranted. Hashtag hashtag when we find that damned cybernetic monstrosity, hashtag hashtag. The assembled Kryptonians exchanged glances as General Zed continued his angry tirade. While he's ranting, I'll call Fury. Kara whispered. Clark nodded. The holographic representation of the second planet of the solar system hovered above the deck as Clark walked round it. Hashtag hashtag, and with the world engine you have with you, you can cryptoform the planet hashtag hashtag Clark said. Hashtag hashtag although it will take a while, you will have allies on Earth, as well as a place for your people to rotate through for rest and relaxation. Food and other supplies can be provided in exchange for licensing technology or providing services such as providing help during a natural disaster hashtag hashtag. Hashtag hashtag as if we could provide even half the help you can hashtag hashtag Taldin scoffed and Clark paused. Hashtag hashtag you will be able to. And probably more than we can hashtag hashtag he said after a few long moments. Hashtag hashtag the yellow sun will empower you and since Venus is closer to the sun than Earth is, you will become more powerful as the solar energy supercharges your cells. Flight, super strength, super speed, increased lifespans and many other abilities will soon be available to you, but as a friend of mine told me, with great power comes great responsibility hashtag hashtag. Hashtag hashtag we, will become, hashtag hashtag. Hashtag hashtag do not be tempted to try to conquer Earth hashtag hashtag Clark warned. Hashtag hashtag I have helped them to create weapons that can kill us with a single shot, just so that any attempt to abuse our powers can be countered hashtag hashtag. Zed raised an eyebrow at that. Hashtag hashtag you would give them power over yourselves, hashtag hashtag. Kara Van scoffed at that. Hashtag hashtag ha. Clark did it so that they wouldn't be scared of him, it's people like my boyfriend who stop them trying to abuse it hashtag hashtag. Zed looked at the blushing human in question. Hashtag hashtag you, are you genetically compatible, hashtag hashtag. Hashtag hashtag not really hashtag hashtag Kara admitted. Hashtag hashtag viable human / Kryptonian clones can be made, we know of 3 at the moment, but actual natural reproduction, not without a lot of medical help hashtag hashtag. Hashtag hashtag rebuilding our race will take a long time, especially if we wish to avoid inbreeding and the problems that causes hashtag hashtag Zed mused, only for Clark to cough. Hashtag hashtag once you have Venus transformed and the framework for a viable society established, I'll start releasing the Q&A samples I recovered from Argo to you for cloning purposes. I have several hundred of them in a safe place but raising the resulting children. I'll release the samples gradually so that you don't get overwhelmed hashtag hashtag. Zed nodded. Hashtag hashtag this sounds reasonable hashtag hashtag. Hashtag hashtag in return, however, Earth requests that first, New Krypton enters into a mutual protection pact with Earth hashtag hashtag Clark stated. Hashtag said pact to include provision for a space defense force crewed by both Kryptonians and humans. Hashtag logical. Hashtag Zed agreed. Hashtag second, limited immigration to Venus once the environment allows. Hashtag Clark added. Hashtag preferably without slavery or indentured servitude. Ideally as equals, but given your need to re-establish our race. Hashtag provisionally agreed, subject to further negotiations. Hashtag Zed said. Hashtag third, hashtag your word of honor that so long as Earth takes no action against New Krypton will take no action against Earth. Hashtag I would have insisted on such a clause anyway. Hashtag Zed nodded. Hashtag anything else. Hashtag yes. Hashtag Clark said with a wry smile. Hashtag you and any two of your allies accompany us back down if you want. I'm about to head back so that I can finally get married. Zed's eyebrows shot up at the irritated tone of Clark's voice, even though he didn't understand the final bit. Hashtag we came at a bad time, then hashtag yeah. Hashtag Clark growled. Hashtag you could say that. Hashtag Zed nodded. Hashtag then may I offer you a ride down. Hashtag I think that first, you need to learn English. Hashtag Clark said. Jean. Here, Clark. A red-headed woman said as she stepped out of the crowd of humans and others from Earth on the opposite side of the hologram. Hashtag Jean is a telepath. Hashtag Clark explained. Hashtag she has provided most of us Kryptonians with the ability to speak and understand English. Hashtag Nam-Ek stepped forwards and briefly reached out to place a finger against the back of Zed's neck. Hashtag sir, since I am a telepath, I could get the language from this Jean, check it to see if there is anything harmful, and if it is as they say, distribute it to the rest of the crew. Hashtag Zed nodded. Nam-Ek will learn first. Jean nodded as she stepped forwards. Hashtag I will need to touch your head for this. May I? Hashtag Nam-Ek retracted his helmet and Jean reached up, resting her fingers lightly on his forehead. Hashtag sir, why are we not using this planet? Hashtag Feyre asked curiously as she, Nam-Ek and Zed boarded the shuttle that they were going to use to follow the others down. Hashtag it has plenty of resources. Hashtag practice using this English of theirs. Also, did you not see the power that Kall and the others had? Zed asked. As we are now, they have a good chance of destroying the world engine before we can deploy it, and a higher chance of destroying it once it has landed. The native humans would also rise against us, and there are but little more than 50 of us, while many of the humans have powers and abilities we cannot counter. Remember also the Q&A that Kall retrieved from Argo. Those samples would be lost to us if we turned our hand against Earth. Feyre nodded slowly as she strapped herself into the co-pilot's seat. I understand, sir. But, the next planet in? Wouldn't it be too hot? It probably would be if it were remaining in that orbit. Zed smirked. With the world engine, we can move it, place it on the same path as Earth, but on the other side of the star. With relay satellites in polar orbit around the star, we will have light-speed communications, albeit with a delay of up to 40 of their minutes for a round trip. Freighting supplies may be slow, but between this world and ours, we shall have full coverage of the system that none may launch an attack without us detecting it. And when do we conquer this world? Zed frowned. We do not. Kall values it highly, and I made a promise to Jor-El that I would watch out for him. Should we try to seize Earth, Kall would stand against us to his dying breath. I may have done many things, slain entire armies, but I keep my word. Earth will be our ally, despite its fractured nature. Feyre nodded even as she was pushed back into her seat by the acceleration of the shuttle. Behind them, the enormous starship ignited its engines and began to move away. Rejoice! Zed said with a small smile. For today we have found our new home. Today, New Krypton is born and our people shall rise once more. Father Johann Karl looked out over the crowd and smiled as, for the second time that day, the grooms stood before him. Looking at the Bayville school band, he nodded to them and the opening strains of the bridal march rolled across the manicured grounds. A bit of movement stirred, then murmurs of admiration sounded as Mystique and Susan Storm, both clad in complementary but not identical dresses, appeared at the end of the aisle with their bridesmaids in tow. "We are the luckiest men on the entire planet," Reed half whispered and Clark nodded. "I know, Reed. I know." Mr. Sinister pushed the petrified body of his cloned servant to one side as the final gate opened with a low rumble. Followed by Mesmero, he strode past the shattered statue and towards the runic-engraved rectangular sarcophagus set between a quartet of obelisks, all of which were glowing with a slowly pulsating blue light. "My master," he whispered reverently, placing one hand on the sarcophagus. "Will we revive him now?" Mesmero asked and Sinister shook his head. "No. If we awaken him now, he will be weak. Once I infuse him with the powers of as many mutants as possible, enhanced by the abilities of the Kryptonians, then it will be time for our Lord and Master to awaken from his eternal slumber and once more rule over all. Soon, my loyal aide, soon and Sabanur will arise to take the world in his hands, and we shall be rewarded and stand by his side." Check the description for the links to the author.